I'm sorry if it's a bit chilly around here. Wait, who am I kidding? I've taken control of the thermostat to get you in the mood for our look at the Abominable Snowman today. I'm Kev, your expedition guide. At the moment, Ben's on a retreat somewhere for a fiver's worth of enlightenment, and Smokey's closely investigating the après-ski, whatever that is. But I'm sure we'll find them eventually. So wrap up and welcome to the House of Hammer. The Abominable Snowman, or the Abominable Snowman of the Himalayas as it's known in the US, just in case they didn't know, was first released as part of a double bill with the rock and roll prison farm movie, I'm not making this up, Untamed Youth in sunny August 1957 in the UK. It was probably to remind us that winter would be here in a couple of days. To get the authentic sight of a cast frozen through, the principal photography took place between 28th of January and 5th of March of that year, at the bitterly cold Bray, where you can usually spot someone's breath, none more so than in The Curse of Frankenstein, that's supposed to be indoors. Unusually for Hammer at this time, the nearby and much larger Pinewood studios are used for the mountainside sets, and genuine location footage is shot a couple of weeks earlier at an observatory in the Pyrenees by a tiny second unit. This second unit didn't include a Mr. Forrest Tucker, who would often tell tales of his adventures in the mountains, but Hammer were happy to let him embellish to his heart's content. After all, he was a Hollywood star, and there'll be more about him later. They were always keeping a sharp eye on what's on trend as well, and were keen to cash in on the wave of mild interest the British public had in Yetis, and you'll hear more about that very shortly. But before all of that, a quick word about what gave the Abominable Snowman a much more epic look than we're used to at this stage. Hammerscope. It's a variation on CinemaScope that makes use of a special lens to squish the image onto a 35mm film. When the film goes to the cinemas, they use a similar lens to reverse the squishing. Hammer's lens was made in Copenhagen for use at the ABPC studios, but it had a minor flaw, so Hammer bought it for a lot less than the original price. Francis Searle, who'd worked on so many Hammer films before, used the process on his independent film Day of Grace later on in 1957, and he said, "It had been cobbled together by George Hill, the king of camera gear in Wardour Street. But oh dear, talk about string and elastic." Director Val Guest also wasn't a great fan of the process and had to rethink how he would block out all his shots. It didn't stop the bargain bin process being used again though, and Hammerscope went on to make an appearance on the credits of a load of Hammer films until 1965, when it was finally retired. Probably worn out. Something else that probably helps the look of the Abominable Snowman is the return to black and white film after the very colourful Curse of Frankenstein. Monochrome was also something else that Hammer would carry on using until 1965. When something works out that well, they really like to stick with it until it doesn't, which is why Smoke is here to bring you up to speed on Nigel Kneale and his involvement with our favourite family-run studio.
You've probably noticed a name cropping up more and more recently, that of one Nigel Kneale. For those of you who may have had a similar reaction as yours truly not too long ago, I'll go ahead and ask the question for you. Just who is Nigel Kneale? Personally, I had heard the name and had seen it crop up from time to time over the years, most notably for me on The Stone Tape and Woman in Black, but a little more on them later. I should preface with what you're about to hear by saying, like we've said a few times before, I'm not a biographer. This isn't a biography. And there are many more outlets and much more knowledgeable people than me who could tell you a lot more about Mr. Kneale's accomplishments. But that's not to say the forthcoming isn't worth listening to. For me, to start with Nigel Kneale, it's to clear up the confusion I had around Quatermass as a whole. I keep seeing snippets and pictures from various productions that look nothing like the two films we watched for this show. So, let's sort this out. Nigel Kneale wrote the first 6-episode series of Quatermass, and these 6 episodes were broadcast live during July and August of 1953. Because of the live transmission, only 2 episodes survive today and exist in the BBC's archives. 2 years later, in 1955, Hammer released the Quatermass Experiment. As discussed on our episode, Kneale was not pleased with how star Brian Donlevy portrayed the titular character. Even so far as saying in 1986, Donlevy was then really on the skids and didn't care what he was doing. He took very little interest in the making of films or in playing the part. It was a case of take the money and run. Or in the case of Mr. Donlevy, waddle. Okay, so that's that part cleared up. Now on to the next. Because of the massive success of the first Quatermass series, a second series was a certainty. However, just before that, he had his original script of The Creature, adapted for television and broadcast in January of 1955. This, of course, would end up being a subject matter of today's episode of The Abominable Snowman. Quatermass 2 followed swiftly afterwards, released in part to combat the BBC's new broadcast rival of ITV. The series was a massive success, pulling in viewers of up to 9 million people. Leaving the BBC in 1956, Kneale would once again team up with Hammer, this time actually writing the screenplay for Quatermass 2. One can only imagine the dismay he felt when he found out that not only was he returning to Hammer, but so was Brian Donlevy. And that brings us up to where we are on this episode, in 1957, and Hammer adapt the TV series of The Creature into today's feature. But, of course, this is not the end of the confusion of the Quatermass saga. Later that same year, Kneale was commissioned to write a third Quatermass serial for TV, which was eventually broadcast as Quatermass and the Pit across December of 1958 and January of 1959. This, of course, would in time also be produced by Hammer, but wouldn't see the light of day until 1967. This wouldn't be his last writing gig for Hammer either. He also adapted Nora Loft's 1960 novel The Devil's Own into what became The Witches, that was released in 1966. Now, obviously, that was just me focusing mostly on the Quatermass side of things, but if you go through his writing credits, it's hard not to be impressed. His version of Orwell's 1984 in 1954 has gone down in British TV history. So much so that it was discussed in Parliament, and allegedly counted among its fans Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip. In the year 2000, the BFI included it on their list of the 100 greatest British television programmes of the 20th century. As I mentioned earlier, Nigel Kneale wrote the script for 1972's The Stone Tape, a ghost story broadcast on Christmas Day of that same year. The influence from it is still felt to this day, not only with being discovered by a brand new set of fans of the spooky and creepy, but it's also cited as a main influence for Carpenter's Prince of Darkness and also Tobe Hooper's Poltergeist. In 1982, after an offer that was made by John Landis to work on a screenplay of a remake of The Creature from the Black Lagoon fell through, Kneale was invited by director Joe Dante to write a script for the forthcoming third film in the Halloween series. An agreement was met under the proviso that it would bear no relation to either of the first 2 films. Even though the script met the approval of John Carpenter, the insistence of producer Dino De Laurentiis that the film should include a lot more violence caused Nigel to have his name removed from the film. Then we come to The Woman in Black, shown on ITV on Christmas Eve of 1989. This was to prove to be another cultural event, and the topic of much hush whispers and chatter on the playgrounds when the kiddies went back to school. Ironically, considering his anger at how his scripts had been handled by Hammer, especially during the Quatermass Experiment, Nigel Kneale drew the ire of Susan Hill, the author of the Woman in Black novel, for changing details and character names. A cursory glance around while doing research shows a staggering amount of other works that he produced over his career, but also the influence he's had on a myriad of artists too, from Stephen King to Grant Morrison, to name just a couple. This, of course, was just a very brief summary of his career, but it is worth looking into, to find out more about his life and other works produced. You may come away with it, though, like me, with more questions. Was he a genius? Was he hard to work with? Was he a spiky and oftentimes grumpy sod? Are we thankful for all the hours of entertainment he has given us? I think the resounding answer is yes.
By this time in history, we know that Nigel Kneale likes to write about giant space willies. But why did he decide to start scribbling about giant hairballs instead? So we have a little bit more context before going any further. Ben's here, like he was with Robin Hood, to hopefully furnish us with some facts about something that might never have existed.
Given that our movie of choice is concerned with a hunt for the Abominable Snowman, aka the Yeti, I thought the logical thing to do would be to have a little look into what we know about them. Him. It. So, the Yeti is like a big monkey man thing, supposedly inhabiting the Himalayan mountain range in Asia. I'll confess that until I sat down and thought about this, I hadn't really considered that the supposed existence of the Yeti was geographically constricted. I thought they could pop up anywhere. The Alps, the Appalachians, the Andes, the Foods of the World aisle in Asda. But no. The origins of Yeti folklore are difficult to trace and lead back to a combination of factors including Sherpa stories and misidentified animals such as bear or yak. Now, if you ask me to describe a Yeti, based on my understanding drawn from popular culture, I'd likely say big and hairy, because I'm quite the wordsmith, you know, capable of painting quite the oral canvas. But specifically, that hair would be light, so as to be camouflaged against the snowy backdrop of the Himalayas. But, dear listener, prepare to be shocked. Well, possibly. Because Tibetan lore describes three main varieties of Yetis. The Nyalmo, which has black fur and is the largest and fiercest, standing around 15 feet tall. The Chuti, which stand around 8 feet tall and live 8,000 to 10,000 feet above sea level. And the Rangshim-Bombo, which has reddish-brown fur and is only 3 to 5 feet tall. So, picture the scene if you will. There I am, halfway up Everest on the hunt for the Yeti, only to encounter a 3-foot red-headed monkey man, leading me to exclaim, "Christ almighty, I'm not sure what that is, but it can't be an abominable snowman, because what kind of snowman is brown? A terrible one, that's what. Anyway, can we go back to base camp now, because I'm frightened." And this revelation only encourages us to take a brief look at the Yeti's mythical brethren, the Bigfoot. This exists only in North America, if indeed it exists at all, which it probably doesn't, but at least it doesn't have an airport named after it. The point being, the Bigfoot looks just like the Yeti, covered in black, dark brown or dark reddish hair. Very confusing. But let's for a moment put a pin in Yetis, and take a step back to enjoy the wider picture. Yetis and Bigfoots are examples of cryptids. These are animals that cryptozoologists believe may exist somewhere in the wild, but whose present existence is disputed or unsubstantiated by science. Cryptozoology is a pseudoscience, which primarily looks at the anecdotal stories and other claims rejected by the scientific community. Pseudoscience is a bit like science, except anyone can do it because you don't have to let things like facts, proof, logic, peer review or accountability hamper your hypotheses and indeed your conclusions. Anyway, while we're here, let's have a look at 7 other reported cryptids that sit alongside the Yeti and the Bigfoot. Now, I make no apologies for this aside and getting distracted, because this is the type of thing I really like. Remember, these are supposed actual beasties roaming the earth/waters/skies of planet Earth. Number 1, the Cajun Sasquatch, otherwise known as the Honey Island Swamp Monster. Doesn't he have a breakfast cereal? Anyway, he lurks in the wetlands of Louisiana, supposedly another big monkey man, possibly with crab claws. Sounds absolutely terrifying. Number 2, from Ohio we have the Loveland Frog. It's a big frog man. Well, a 4-foot frog man. Might just be an iguana without a tail. Also might be dead, as a police officer apparently shot it in 1972. Number 3, the South African Mamlambo. This is supposedly a giant reptile monster, about 20 meters long. It has the head of a horse, the lower body of a fish, short legs, and the neck of a snake. It sounds, frankly, like something a toddler would draw. Number 4, the Chupacabra. Spotted all over the Americas, this thing looks like a Doctor Who villain. Think alien lizard, and you're on your way there. The name Chupacabra literally translates as goat sucker from the Spanish, and comes from the animal's reported vampirism, as the Chupacabra is said to attack and drink the blood of livestock, including, think you've probably already got there ahead of me, goats. The Dover Demon, who is in this list simply because I love the name, is a creature reportedly sighted in the town of Dover, Massachusetts, on April the 21st and April the 22nd, 1977. The name frankly creates an air of excitement that the reality can't match, as the creature, described as having big eyes and long spindly arms, did nothing demonic apart from look weird from a distance. Number 6, the Mongolian Death Worm, is a creature alleged to exist in the Gobi Desert. Shaped like a sausage and about 2 feet long, it is so poisonous that merely the touch of it means instant death. I've had a couple of hot dogs like that at the football over the year. And finally we have the Mothman of West Virginia, also known as the Winged Man, Winged Man, Bird Man, UFO Bird, Mason Bird Monster. It's basically a big thing with wings. Possibly a crane, or a heron, or Richard Gere. Now, I'm well aware that I've gone off-piste somewhat here, and I was supposed to be introducing you to Yetis, so let us return there before I wrap this segment up. So far we know that they're big, hairy, live up the Himalayas, and are not always light in colour. Well, we can add to that. The Yeti was part of the pre-Buddhist beliefs of several Himalayan people, described as a glacier being and depicted as an ape-like creature who carried a large stone as a weapon and making whistling whooshing sounds. In 1832, James Prinsep's Journal of the Asiatic Society of Bengal published trekker B. H. Hodgson's account of his experiences in northern Nepal. His local guide spotted a creature covered with long dark hair which seemed to flee in terror on 2 legs, and intrigue in the mythical Yeti only increased. In the 1950s and early 1960s, this culminated in several expeditions up into the Himalayas in search of the Yeti. The Daily Mail spent the equivalent of £1 million today sending a team of journalists and mountaineers on an expedition to the Himalayas in 1954 to find the Abominable Snowman. They were gone for 15 weeks and were accompanied by ornithologists, zoologists and 370 porters, who carried tranquilizer guns and a cage. If alive, the Abominable Snowman was to be caught and shipped back to London to be examined. Unfortunately, the team found only some big footprints and some funny hair. To date, no one has been able to provide that definitive proof of Yeti-ness. But maybe one day.
Okay, thanks for that, Ben. So, before we toddle off to Tibet, I'll give you a hopefully quick synopsis so you have at least some kind of a crampon to what Smokey, Ben and myself are wittering on about as we discuss this snow-capped shocker. Dr. John Rollison, a noted botanist, is coerced by his friend, an American showman who's conveniently called Tom Friend, into joining an expedition up the Himalayas to search for evidence of the Yeti. However, it is for exploitation rather than scientific purposes that Friend seeks the Yeti, and dead or alive, the hairy beast will make him rich and also restore his reputation. However, having shot an abominable snowman, numbers in the expedition diminish one by one as they attempt to get the body back to civilization. As the team numbers are dwindling on the mountain, back at the Buddhist monastery base camp, Dr. Rollison's wife Helen gets more than a bit rattled when their Sherpa, Kusang, arrives back on his own. She decides to set up a rescue mission that includes their friend, Peter Fox, a man incapable of doing anything more than complaining like an Englishman abroad would. Will she make it in time? Will the adventurers bring back a beastie or a monkey? And will Foxy ever finish his tea? We might answer some of these questions in our spoilerific review, but we might leave you with more questions, a bit like reading an issue of the Fortean Times.
Okay, gentlemen, it's gotten a little nippy, so throw on your parkas, get your emergency rations, and take a gun. Don't take a gun, because it never ends well. So we move on from we move on from the science fiction to just the fiction, I suppose, if you will, to The Abominable Snowman of 1957 from Hammer. This is Hammer obviously thinking they've got something here. We've done Quatermass, we've done X the Unknown, we've done Frankenstein. Let's go on to The Abominable Snowman. We are starting to see a pattern emerging. Happy with the direction that Hammer are going now?
I certainly am. I feel like there's still too enamoured with Nigel Kneale. I'm really glad that he's not reciprocating at all. He really doesn't like Hammer, and then it turns out that Nigel Kneale really doesn't like anybody anyway.
Can I just point out a quote that our friend Philip said online the other day, which was, Nigel is cuddly as a cactus.
Perfect.
Which I love.
Yeah, which absolutely nails him straight away. But yeah, I'm glad that they don't keep going back to Nigel Kneale, because that could have ended up being a bit tiresome. The quality of the films now is just ridiculous. You're thinking, good God, it's not that long since we were watching Quota Quickies, and suddenly we're getting some pretty epic filmmaking getting done.
Yeah, and now I will throw it over to Ben, but Ben, let me start by saying you're not allowed to start this bit with, this isn't Frankenstein.
No, but I can build on that point and with a constructive criticism, which is, to answer your original question, the issue I've got here is not the subject matter, it's how it's handled. So if you call a film The Abominable Snowman, you create certain expectations about that film and what the viewer may expect to see in it, and it is not a sort of a intelligent understanding of the fact that the Abominable Snowman is in fact superior to mankind and a bit of a pacifist wet blanket. What I wanted to see here was, I wanted to see, carnage on the mountains, and I suspect and the contemporary 1957 viewer of the film are in league there, because I found this film quite the disappointment. I know it's one thing to think, even in the mid-50s, everyone had been up bloody the Himalayas looking for the thing. So let's have a different take on it and, make it a sympathetic character. I don't want to see a sympathetic character. I don't mind it being sympathetic, but I still want to see it rip some arms off.
See, I will admit, I'm in two minds a little bit about this, because yes, I see where you come from. If you're wanting to go for a straight, pure monster horror movie, then fair dues. Yeah, let's have some arm ripping, as you say. That's brilliant. But there is also the sort of, if you will, the sort of Val Lewton approach of sort of like, Cat People and I Walk with a Zombie, of not having to show the monster all the time. So I can see the sides of both camps. I really can. However, I've got to side with you, Ben, a little bit as well. I mean, it's a meditation on man, isn't it? And that man's the real monster. And if you're following up the Curse of Frankenstein and Quatermass and whatnot of as radioactive space wibblies, to a meditation on a Yeti that can read your mind and then scare the crap out of you, that's a big diversion.
Yeah, and I just think it isn't what I wanted to see. And can I detach my criticism enough from that to look at it? Well, no, I can. To look at it as a film on its own merits. But do I think it stands alone as an interesting film? Possibly a little bit, but is it one that I think should be remembered alongside Hammer's best? Absolutely not. It's not the film that the title suggests it's going to be. I mean, I know that the screenplay was called The Creature, or the original work that it was based on. And I just think it's a real disappointment, because this is set up of, there's the isolated, Himalayas, they're up there, they're looking for this thing, they're on its territory, they shoot one, surely it's going to turn up and, as I say, rip some limbs. But it doesn't. But the conclusion it reaches instead, it's just, I'm just not interested in telepathic Yetis. Maybe that's just me.
See, if you're wanting Yetis that tear people apart, then surely you'd have been better off the Snow Creature or Snow Beast or Man Beast. But yeah, this is definitely, I think this is why I enjoy this more, because it is something different. They're actually doing something, they're pushing it. And the way that it's set out as well, it's almost like it's like a proto-slasher. Or Alien or something like that, where you've got a party and you're getting them picked off one by one until you end up with just Peter Cushing left, and then you're not even sure whether he's left either. So, it's like a and then there were none kind of structure to it.
Well, actually, let's divert off that for just a moment. I mean, you mentioned obviously Peter Cushing there, but we also, in Hammer terms anyway, we also have the return of Forrest Tucker for the first and last time, but the first time since Breaking the Circle. In that, he was a shouty In this, he is a less shouty and I think this role serves him better than the one he had in Breaking the Circle. Do we agree?
I think it works perfectly. I feel like it's absolutely bang on casting for him here, because this is the kind of guy you really needed to have. I know that the TV version had Stanley Baxter as that role of friend.
He couldn't do this, yeah.
Which is great. I'm glad he couldn't, because Forrest Tucker is a
Kev, he couldn't do it for a bad reason, don't say that.
No, he was too busy being famous, that's all. But Forrest Tucker is a perfect fit for it, because you need that brash American, which is perfect for him, because that's all he could do, basically.
He is better cast in this film, I would agree with that. He does unfortunately seem to encourage everyone around him to act in the same way he acts, which, how they weren't all killed by an avalanche in minute 1, I don't know, given all the shouting that goes on. But he is a better fit for this film, and he is more watchable because of it. And I think that the credit to the director for getting some actual acting out of him. And what I would say is that when he dies in an avalanche, it's the best acting I've ever seen him do is to stand there and be killed by falling snow. But he does it very effectively.
It was the Ra's al Ghul death of Hammer films. It really was from Batman Begins. It really was. But something I do like to do every now and again is point out that, again, filled with Hammer alumni here, obviously Peter Cushing and obviously Forrest Tucker, but Richard Wattis, who plays Foxy. We've seen him before. He was the policeman with the, do you remember the exploding drawer in Blood Orange?
Yeah.
that was him. Which was, so that was really cool to see him again. Robert Brown, who plays Shelley, now who does, I will hasten to add, who does take on the role of really, really shouty, annoying man in this. This is his 5th film that we've seen him in for Hammer. He was in Cloudburst. We've just seen him in The Steel Bayonet. He was also in The Gambler and the Lady, and he was in Death of an Angel as well. So
good grief.
He's got severe Hammer pedigree. And then, of course, we have Kusang, who's the sort of the Sherpa.
Wolf Forrest.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And we saw him in The Glass Cage. He was in that as well.
Yep.
But I'd also like to point out something I love when you just look on IMDb and you see things out. He ended up in Emmerdale, which I think is wonderful. So I always just love things like that. But I would like to point out, Maureen Cornell, who plays Helen. I thought she was great. I mean, she was given a little bit of a thankless task of being the sort of the cook and the carer for Peter Cushing. But what she did do, I thought she did very well.
Well, I think you've kind of dumbing down the character a bit there, because she does. You've reduced her to being a cook and cleaner. Well, in fact, she's his saviour.
She is a scientist as well. That is my fault.
She's a scientist, and she actually is an adventurer as well, because she's straight out there. Gets
all right.
Gets all those Sherpas and right. Let's go get him. Brilliant.
I thought it was, for a character that was clearly written in afterwards, because she was an extension of the original. Her character and that of Foxy were added in for the film version. I thought that her character and Cushing's Doctor played nicely off each other to add that bit of depth that didn't necessarily make it feel like a token female character had been written in. I don't think I would have guessed that if I hadn't read it afterwards. So I think that is to the film's credit. And as Kev points out, the fact that she was his equal, she wasn't,
No, you're right.
There's no reflection on what you said, Smokey, because she does spend most of the film making dinner for men and wandering around after them. But in the dialogue, you pick up on the fact that she's actually, if he wasn't getting distracted by yetis up mountains, they'd actually be there to collect things, collect plants and stuff together.
Yeah.
So that I'd give that the film's credit. I'm not so sure I'm quite as forgiving on where her story actually goes, because the whole I'll arrange a rescue mission and we'll go up the mountain after you, which they kind of begin, but then that gets abandoned when he just mysteriously appears halfway down the mountain, frozen like an icicle.
Stood up, yes, and looking dead. I think I genuinely thought he was meant to be dead when I saw that the first time. I'm still not convinced he wasn't.
That would have been a terrible ending as well, because you wouldn't have had that whole thing where there is no Yeti. I feel like good job we didn't get that as a final shot.
I did wonder if the intention had been to leave that option open, though, because the scene where he reappears down the mountain and is met by his wife, and she reacts as if he is dead. I had expected the film to end there, and then, as you say, you get the sort of the bit on the end that's with a hypnotized Peter. I don't like that at all. With a hypnotized Peter Cushing saying, "Oh, there is no Yeti," you know, or whatever it is he says. I'm paraphrasing, listener, but that's the gist of it.
I feel like he's not hypnotized. I feel like he's actually come to his senses a bit, and he's thought, right. He's kind of took on board what the yogi guy told him.
The llama.
The llama, yeah. The llama told him, and yeah, and thought. Yeah, I'm not going to say anything about this because...
Yeah. He's seen the damage it can do if you admit these things are real, so might as well keep stum on it.
Mm.
Can I just say, I didn't like the llama. I would have happily punched him.
Oh, come on, no. Even with Foxy being very standoffish and not trusting, but with Peter Cushing being his most charmingly gentlemanly self... there's no way he was going to be violent towards the llama. He was just being nice.
He was just an unpleasant little man.
You're not very
lied.
Buddhist at all.
He manipulated people.
No.
He was generally rude. He had Mrs. What's-her-face manhandled at
Helen,
one point, but weirdly for no reason in his funny secret quarters. Didn't like him. Would have happily clogged his head off one of those Tibetan bells. Tibetan, one of them things, the monk bells.
Big ding-dong things.
Exactly.
Something I would like to highlight, though, is that obviously we mentioned before that Nigel Kneale has this reputation, of... What was the term I read in the encyclopedia? He writes 10,000 words when 500 would do. And so they have to cut his words down to fit the script, which is fair dues. However, the dialogue-heavy scenes of this film, i.e. the first scene we see with Peter Cushing and the llama, and then the first scene when the expedition has reached the first camp and they're going through the various bits and pieces of where they're going to travel, how far they've got to go, the supplies they've got, and blah, blah, blah. The script for those really dialogue-heavy bits is brilliant. They were my favourite parts of the film. Granted, it was because no one was yelling their head off.
Yeah.
They were just talking, and they were talking sensibly. And there's even one moment which kind of surprises me every time I see it, is that Forrest Tucker turns to Peter Cushing and he says, "You're the expert. Tell me what I need to know." And it's sort of like, well, there was no, forced exposition there. He was just like saying, no, please do tell me. And I think that's such a clever device, because then he says, well, let's just talk about evolution. And it was like, oh, well, this is really great. Again, they're not treating us like idiots as an audience. We don't need it spoon-fed to us. I think the real sort of proper star of this film is the dialogue-heavy scenes.
I don't think it's any secret that Nigel Kneale hated the fact that Val Guest would regularly slice up his scripts. But Nigel Kneale comes from a radio background, so being an audio medium, you actually have to have a long, wordy script. And I don't think he ever broke out of that particular mindset. And I think this is why he hated films being made of his stuff, because he's just never really got over that. He's never let go of the reins.
Needs trimming and tightening.
Yeah, exactly. And that you don't need a million words to show something on the screen. Yeah, and like you said, the actual dialogue scenes are fantastic. They're all believable as well. You've got Cushing and Connell, but then you've got the way that they work together with Cushing and Tucker, and it all feels quite natural.
Yeah,
I would agree that the dialogue is definitely one of the stronger parts of the film, and I would echo what you said as well. I think it rolls along really nicely, and some of the scenes where, in inverted commas, not much happens, are the best scenes of the film, because the narrative drifts along. The exposition doesn't feel clunky. It feels, like you're listening to an actual conversation, a plausible conversation about the subject matter.
Yeah.
And that is one of the stronger elements. My big gripe with the film is I didn't like where the story went. It wasn't necessarily a reflection that it was a poor story, which I suppose is the lot of a critic is to be able to separate out what you like from what isn't very good, which I suppose is when I reach my conclusion is what I'll try and do. But that said, I still think there's plenty to criticise in this, as well as things to enjoy.
Well, I agree with that. And I think that's something we should delve into as well, which is we haven't seen a Hammer film yet that doesn't have any negatives. That's never going to happen because no film is perfect, no matter how many people would tell you, whatever film is perfect. That's not the case. There are negatives to be had here. I'm assuming, I have some too, but I'm assuming, Ben, you have more from the sounds of it than the rest of us do. Do you want to kick off with a few negatives?
Yeah, I actually start at a positive that I'm going to turn into a negative. And I understand, what I would say is that the footage that's filmed on location is really good.
Yeah, it matches perfectly.
It's beautiful.
Yeah, and the real effort has gone in to transition between the scenes that begin, or at least have some elements of a shot on location versus those that were filmed on a set. But I think it's a good job it's in black and white, I'll give it that. There are a couple of scenes where the sort of the set-based nature of it becomes a little bit distracting, I think, as the film rolls on. But, look at, as I think it was one of you already said, look at the ambition that's been afforded to this as opposed to, 15 films ago when we were looking at things on wobbly sets and, filmed on boats that were actually rooms in the upstairs of pubs. I think, my major criticism is the lack of sort of dramatic payoff. I just think the whole concept of it's going for one of these broad sort of sci-fi concepts that were particularly prevalent in the 50s where, a superior being or a superior intellect is displayed by some form of telekinesis. There was this obsession with like telekinesis and that kind of thing and, telepathy in the 50s. If aliens came, they'd show us they were more intelligent than us because they wouldn't have to speak, they could just think, or they wouldn't have to touch, they could just move things. And we're very much in that realm. It's like, Nigel Kneale had this idea of showing this creature was superior to us somehow. Well, in what way? Physically, sure, it's bigger and hairier, but then what else have you got? And I just think that whole element of, sort of, it can read
I
minds.
love that hair is superior.
Well, yeah, lots of it.
Well, look at us do. Yeah, it is.
Yeah, true.
But yeah, I just thought the whole concept of that, it was misplaced in this particular film. And the other criticisms would be, we talked about, it's very shouty the whole way through.
Oh, God.
The narrative stalls because of it, and there's no real tension created because the annoying monk character doesn't warn them off really going up there and doesn't say don't do it because you're doomed and stuff. And so you never set out with sort of that tension of I want to see the Yeti versus, but what's going to happen to them? It's kind of like a boy's own adventure. And when they do sort of get up there and an accident occurs and traps someone's leg, and thus rendering the whole operation in a sort of a bit of a disaster, no one really comments on the severity of the fact that they're stuck up a mountain with someone who's broken a leg. It just becomes all a bit sort of matter of fact. And it's that dramatic tension that is completely devoid in this film. And that's the thing that really got me. I wanted there to be some kind of, circumstance or some kind of, payoff that I was worried about or that I was looking forward to. And it just wasn't there. And what do you get instead? Psychic Yetis. No.
Yeah. There is that line, isn't there, when the first quote unquote avalanche happens, and then you go, right, that's it, no more shouting now, and he was like, oh, thank God. Doesn't last, but
for 45 seconds.
Yeah, it doesn't last at all.
Because I think there's a scene, sort of at about the 2/3 mark, where what's his face is hurt his leg, and he's in his tent, and they're off looking for a Yeti. Yeah, yes.
There's the irony.
His accent, his accent as well. They sort of. It sounds like they say, "Well, I'm trying to be Scottish," and they do the first thing. They said, "No, just don't bother after that," because God knows what that was.
You're from Cornwall, are you? Oh, right.
He'd done a world tour in about 3 sentences, but he's in a tent, and a big hairy arm comes into the tent, and you think, "Oh God, that's terrifying. This is quite tense," but that's as scary as it ever gets, and it's just to be. Also, as an aside, it's another Hammer arm. We love an arm at Hammer, don't we? It's all you see of the Yeti is an arm and some eyes and a funny nose. But I tell you, we love an arm.
We've said it before. Phil Leakey was an expert on creating manky arms for Hammer films.
He loves his arms.
He's the hands man.
Do you know that there's actually a separate credit for the eyes on this as well? The eyes are John Ray for the Yeti eyes. But he's not. But he's not either of the Yetis in it. The Yetis are played by Joe. Yeah, Joe. Yeah, it must be. But why didn't they just use Joe Powell or Fred Johnson's eyes? I don't know. Maybe they were both crossed. I don't know. But yeah, strange. Going back to the llama, though, Ben, just for a minute, I feel like.
By the way, I was going to say that any mention of the llama, I'm going to laugh every time.
I was going to say, the llama just makes you giggle.
Every time they said it, I just thought of a llama, like an alpaca type thing. Just can't help myself. Just where my brain goes. Sorry, Kev, carry on.
He's got more hair as well, then.
He does.
But the llama, I feel like he's supposed to be punchable. I feel like he's actually thinking, right, I hate all these tourists. They're all going to cock it up. We've had all these years living in peace with these crazy Yetis, and they leave us alone, we leave them alone, and all good and proper. And that's why he just lets them go. You know, he pretty much says something like, you just follow your fate, you know, because he knows what's going to happen to him. Yeah. He knows that they're going to cop it.
Yeah,
and that's why
I agree with that.
I think that's why he doesn't try and warn them off or anything like that. It's like, go on, fill your boots.
I completely agree. Yeah, he knows that only Peter Cushing is going to come back. And he knows it is doomed to fail. But a couple of things there I want to pick up on what you guys just said. One, I agree with you, Ben, in that of all the most frustrating set pieces in not just a Hammer horror film, but a Hammer a horror film in general, is, as you say, you get this big, scary, hairy arm coming into the tent and, you know, fingering and fondling around. And that's it. Nothing.
No, exactly.
It disappears. Nothing. But also is the bit when
shy.
It's suddenly, but also is the bit when they suddenly realise that one of them's got a gun and he's just started shooting. I think it's Forrest Tucker. He just gets his revolver out and starts shooting. And there must have been, because I could just hear Ben's voice in my head, just saying, bloody Americans. Just wanting to shoot everything.
Who brings a gun up a mountain? Yeah. What is it? Is it Deep Impact or Armageddon where they say who brings a gun into space? And that's what I was thinking all the time.
He brought a gun to an avalanche fight.
He created the avalanche fight.
He did. I was just, he's so like, because even Peter Cushing says, oh yeah, what have you got up there? More guns, you know, and that was his very proper English way of just saying, fuck, God blimey, you know, don't bring guns.
What practical use does it, other than warding off Yetis, what practical use does a gun have up a mountain?
Well, I suppose he doesn't know where he's up against, does he? So he might have to actually take one back dead rather than alive. I know he doesn't want to, and he makes that quite clear when he does get one dead.
He's the Carter Burke of this expedition. He wants to bring one back for study.
Also, speaking of such things, can I go back to the llama? I fully accept that I'm not au fait with the teachings of Buddha, but is it particularly Buddhist to know that people are going up to their doom and not only to not stop them but to encourage them up there? I'm not sure that's going to do it for Buddha.
I'll go back to what Kev said. You know, he's sick and tired of these bloody tourists, and he just sort of said, I don't care if you die.
He's writing his own special book.
I was going to say, I'm not sure that's what the meditations should be teaching him, but whatever, I suppose.
Yeah. He's just well, you think about it, he's had his gear nicked, which has just been returned to him.
But he's supposed to be forgiving. And, and he's supposed to be embracing the sort of, whatever it is, just sort of omnipresent oneness or something. I tell you, I could happily hurl him down a Himalayan gully.
But he's
I'll show you Nirvana.
He's one with the Yeti.
Down there.
You know, he doesn't
one-
care.
He's one with the Yeti. He's Team Yeti, is he? Yeah.
He's Team Yeti.
He is.
But why? That's what I don't understand.
Because
They haven't
the
got-
Yetis have been there longer than the Americans and the British have.
And then.
So he'd be Team Dinosaur if this was something else.
I think so.
Yeah.
If this was like a Ray Harryhausen movie,
Yeah,
you know, and dinosaurs were walking the earth, you know, he'd be Team T-Rex all the way.
Yeah, Team Plasticine Monster. Yeah, fine. Fine. They're not even in some kind of symbiotic relationship. That, you know, they're just they inhabit the same big mountain space.
Yep.
They're just both. Anyway, never mind.
Okay.
Wow. I never realised Ben was going to take on Buddhism.
Not now. Not now. That's true meanings.
No.
No, they've lost him forever.
Too right.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think we've done this quite well, gentlemen. So I think we should have some final and general thoughts of this and a rating as well. I'm hesitant to do this, but Ben, I think we'll start with you first on this one. Final thoughts, rating?
Okay, I'll confess I was quite disappointed by this. It wasn't at all what I expected, and it wasn't what I was hoping for. I think it's okay. That aside, my expectations aside, I think it's all right as a film. I'd give it a 5 out of 10. You know, I've seen worse. I think it sorely lacks a punch, though, in terms of a narrative and in terms of a quest film, you know, even one with a revelationary, soft, sort of philosophical, stupid ending. I think even all of those factors taken into consideration against my substantial personal bias, it still lacks a lot. So yeah, I'll give it a 5. It's not the worst film I've seen by a long way, but it's not very good.
Rightio. Kevin?
Well, I've watched this film so many times, and every time I've watched it, I always pull some more detail out of it. It doesn't matter what it is. You can be watching a scene and there'll be something going on in the background, and you can see that everybody's working on full tilt on this. The sets are amazing. Bernard Robinson does a great job on the monastery, and the snow stuff that's filmed at Pinewood, that works quite well. There's no reason for him to try and go up the French Pyrenees themselves and film it there. That is a fact. The story's great. I loved the soft, wishy-washy ending. I thought it was brilliant, and I'm glad that it is different to all the other Yeti films and Bigfoot films, because honestly, they get boring. And this has got something extra to it, and this is probably why I've watched it so many times, so it's a 10 out of 10 for me.
There's no words. Is it? All I would say is it's got me thinking. Imagine if it turned into like Harry and the Hendersons at the end. That would be brilliant, wouldn't it?
Oh,
like if
wow,
he just talked like with an American accent and had a cigar and joined them in the little monk hut.
Yeah. Brilliant. Something I've been sort of battling with after watching this a few times, and I know you say about the, you know, not seeing the monster and whatnot, but I'm not sure about the end scene in the cave of Peter Cushing seeing, you know, the big hairy monsters approaching him with the eyes. I'm not sure that was as effective as it wished to be. I still can't decide if that annoyed me or not. I'm going to think more on that. I'm kind of in the middle of both of you. It is disappointing because apart from the couple of scenes that I mentioned earlier of the sort of the heavy on the dialogue scenes, which I thought the script was brilliant, nothing in this really grabbed me. And I also thought, as we've said ad nauseum, is that it's so shouty, it's so loud, and it gets really, really annoying. Especially that whole segment in the cave, you know, when they're setting the trap on the ceiling and whatnot, it is all yelling. And I was just like, I can't. And I had to turn it down and mute it on a couple of occasions, which is a surefire sign that I'm getting really annoyed. But as we say, the sets are beautiful. It looks wonderful. The acting's good. Forrest Tucker isn't a really.
Yeah. Surprise. What a shocker.
Oh, come on. Compare this character to the one in Breaking the Circle.
Oh, good God. Yeah.
So it was nice to see him play a bit more sympathetic. You know, that was cool. But yeah, we keep seem to say it every now and again with Hammer. It's a missed opportunity. I think this could be so much better with just a few tweaks. And actually, I'm going to go with Ben. Sorry, Kev. Yeah, let's have a big monster ripping off arms. Let's just go full on. Yeah, I'm with that. So I'm going to give it a 7. It's between a 6 and a 7. It's a very low 7. I'm going to put it that way. Because, yeah, I think it could have been so much better than it actually was. And I'm just going to say now, this isn't Frankenstein.
Due to the previous success of The Creature and Nigel Kneale's other work with Hammer, the production of The Abominable Snowman picked up some early press speculation when it was announced in late 1956. At that point, The Curse of Frankenstein was still in production and still very much under wraps. When it was finally released after The Curse, this somewhat gentle A-rated film in comparison still managed to earn some respect, but only from a few critics, a bit like our own review. Dilys Powell in the Sunday Times said, "For once, an engaging monster is neither bombed, roasted, nor electrocuted. For this welcome courtesy, as well as its thrills and nonsense, I salute the Abominable Snowman." Like Ben, this approach didn't go down well with the cinemagoers, who generally found it disappointing when watched alongside a rock and roll prison farm movie. This could also explain why this is the only time that Aubrey Baring of Baring's Bank would co-produce a Hammer film, despite his involvement in many other productions. Apart from Baring, there's also another couple of notable farewells. As the film was in post-production, founder Will Hammer would die on June the 1st as a result of a cycling accident in Leatherhead. A lifelong physical fitness enthusiast, he was still racing bicycles to the end, and even though his son Anthony Hines was becoming a major driving force in the company, Will remained an enthusiastic promoter of Hammer films, even despite hating the cinema and believing that nothing could beat live entertainment. Our second farewell goes to Forrest Tucker, whose brief appearances here have certainly been memorable. It was very nearly going to be 3 films with a proposed project titled Captain Morgan, Buccaneer. But this proposed production was amongst many others that were scrapped following the success of the Quatermass experiment. This larger-than-life, and if you believe his friends and family's very large entertainer, would hang around British sci-fi for a while after his Tibetan adventure, starring in the Trollenberg Terror and the Strange World of Planet X before becoming a regular feature on American TV. He still managed to continue his career for another 6 months or so after his passing in 1986 of lung cancer at the age of 67. It must have been all the golf he played. And although he's not particularly a Hammer hero, he remains one to millions of others. Now it's our turn to bow out until the next time, where we continue our globe-trotting with a camping trip to Blood Island? What? Really? Never ask Smokey to book your holidays, that's all I can say. If you want to hit us up, our myriad of social connections can all be found on linktr.ee/househammerpod, along with how you can help keep the candles burning via our wonderful Patreon and web store. It's ta-ta for now.
From me, Ben Tillison.
From me, Smokey.
And me, Kev Moore.
Okay, we're coming. How's it going, Doc? Hey, Jock! Come on, Ed. Spread out! Listen. What is it? I was certain I heard something, but you were talking so loudly.